Well, this has been a comedy of errors and struggles. All right, y'all, good morning. I'm sort of at a point to where I could start tearing this thing down and welding out the chassis. I've got just about all the bracing in that I want. I've got a few more things I need to put in, but I cannot put the bracing or the lacing tubes in until after I get everything welded out. But I started figuring for the sway bar, and what I've figured out, the sway bar is going to come off this rear tube here, or the sway bar is going to live in this rear tube, and then there's going to be an arm that goes forward here. And that arm, if you can picture it coming straight off of this plane, if it was straight, I did some testing with articulation and clearances. If it was straight, this tire at full articulation, meaning when this tire is all the way up at bump, which it gets pretty high in here, and then that tire being all the way down, if you can imagine this tire being rotated and tilted inward, that tire will come in contact with the sway bar arm that's straight off of this. So what I'm going to need to do is custom fabricate my sway bar arms to where they come in this way and then curve in and kind of take a jog inward here. However, before I do that, because I've already got my upper shock mount established, I want to go ahead and build out my final trailing arms. And then I want to install the trailing arms on here. And then I want to test articulation again, because the trailing arms I have on here, these temporary trailing arms, are built on 1 3/4 tube, where the final permanent trailing arms are going to be built out of 2-inch tube. So that's going to change the mount height on the bottom shock mount a little bit. So I decided, you know what, I should just go ahead and prep the parts. I've already got the trailing arm designed. I should go ahead and prep the parts and build out those trailing arms and get those installed, do some more flex testing, and just make sure everything's kosher before I start tearing this thing down and welding out the chassis. I've already established, like I said earlier, that I'm going to have to build custom sway bar arms. But given the fact that because the trailing arms are going to be mounted on 2-inch tube rather than the temporary trailing arms that are mounted on 1 3/4, my height distances might be a little different. I was thinking that I should test with the actual trailing arm and test with probably or possibly rotating these axle link mounts down a little bit, just so that I get the bump and the droop exactly how I want it. So yesterday I went ahead and cut the 2-inch tube. This is 2-inch by 250 wall or quarter wall thickness tube. I went ahead and also cut the tubes for the upper links while I was at it for the rear. And that's all the tube I have for link mount material. I'm gonna have to go buy more to do the fronts. Back to the trailing arms. The trailing arms are gonna be sleeved or slugged with 1.5 inch solid 70-75 aluminum. And I've got wobble stopper or uniballs with wobble stoppers for the front mount. The heim will go in the rear. I'm going to make a 2-position trailing arm so that I can tune with the shock mount location. And I'll take you over to the computer and show you what I got. All right, so this is what I got for a trailing arm. Hopefully that shows up okay in the video. There's a little bit of glare with the sun. Right now I've got this overlay plate. So this whole top section is 3/16. There's a 3/16 plate here on the side with an overlay plate that's 1/8 inch. So these 2 plates here are 3/16. There'll be an overlay plate on this side too. And then there's a center spine section that goes the entire length of the trailing arm and runs up to the uniball cup. Then comes down over here and terminates. That center spline section comes down and terminates, it bends down and terminates down into the tube right here. I'm going to do some testing and figure out if I want to do this overlay plate with the T on it, or turn that off and do the overlay plate with the tack 1 lettering on it. I'm going to do some testing and see how fine I can cut into 1/8 inch plate with the plasma table. The T is certainly a lot more, a lot simpler, but we'll have to see. And then you can kind of see, I'll turn off this overlay plate and the side plate, and you can see how the, oops, wrong one. You can see how these spine sections terminate into the tube here. So get the plasma table set up and start cutting all these parts and go from there. Hey, so instead of just playing music on the time lapse, I thought I'd try some voiceover. Right here I'm getting the plasma table ready to go. I've got these little jig blocks that help me square up the sheet, and then I'm also filling up the table with water right now. I've got a really cool water storage system that my uncle and I came up with. Maybe I'll do a video on that setup one day, how I got that all set up. But it's basically 2 50-gallon drums, and I just pressurize the barrels with like 5 psi of air, and fill up the water table, or the water pan on the plasma table. So I'm cutting the initial side pieces for the trailing arms right here. I went and tested them, and they tested out fine, or fit fine. And now I'm just cutting out the top spline section for the back end of the trailing arm right here. I had some trouble with the edge of the plate here because it's sprung up, so I think I had to recut a couple of times. But the plasma table itself originally was a Torchmate 2 plasma table, and we've added some upgrades to it. And then I got with Spark Robotic and upgraded the entire control system with a different torch lifter, and that's really kind of brought the table into the modern century, so, or the modern spec, I guess, if you will. So here I've got this magnet that makes it really handy with the jib crane to move sheets around on the table. I've got a spreader bar. I can use 2 magnets to move an entire sheet, and I've been able to lift up to a 1/2 inch piece of plate steel with that jib crane and magnet set up with a little, it's got a little winch, a little Harbor Freight winch, and then the Harbor Freight trolley for the I-beam. So along with the upgrade with the Spark Robotic control system, I'm able to now use a remote control, sort of. It's basically a USB keyboard, but I can walk over to any part of the table and line up the torch where I want things to start. it's kind of hard to see sometimes from the vantage point over by the computer system. So having that wireless keyboard to move things around, be able to walk over there because the table's so big, is really helpful. Here I think I'm cutting the side overlay plates with a fine cut consumable, and that's 1/8 inch and 45 amp. So yeah, it's the upgrades really helped, and to have these to be able to draw up these designs and cut them right here on the spot sure saves time. So here we have the long and painstaking process of cleaning up the material. My process has been in the past to wire wheel first, and this is stuff that's coming off of the plasma table. I'll wire wheel it first and then clean up the cut edge with a flapper disc, and then if the part's small enough, I'll put it in this little tub. Lately I've been using vinegar, white vinegar, but in the past I'd used muriatic acid. The good thing about these parts is they are cut from a P&O steel, pickle and oil finish, rather than hot roll. Hot roll is just way too messy and way too much cleanup. So the vinegar cuts through the P&O really easy, and it makes those plasma cut edges really easy to clean up. And so far it's been working. You'll know if you've watched the videos in the past, you'll know that I've had trouble with porosity on when welding on the plasma cut edges, even if I clean it up with a flap disc. So that's why I've been using the muriatic acid. But with the P&O, I'm able to get away from the muriatic acid because I'm not having to clean up that mill scale. And but I still use the vinegar just as a safety to clean up that edge, and so far it's been good. And the vinegar is a heck of a lot less caustic than the muriatic acid. So here I'm just cleaning up those holes. Those are 1/2 inch. I'll use a stepper drill bit first, and then from there I'll use a regular 1/2 inch drill bit to make sure everything's round. The stepper drill bit just kind of centers everything, and then I'll use a regular 1/2 inch drill bit. And usually when you cut holes that are under 1/2 inch, they usually don't come out completely round, so that's why I got to do that. Next, the DA sander. It's probably not 100% necessary, but it sure is nice to use the DA sander, especially when you're TIG welding stuff. Just get everything nice and clean, and you almost don't have to wipe things down with acetone before you weld them, but I still do. It's just nice to have everything nice and clean and uniform when you're fitting things up and ready to weld. So this is really time consuming, but it's worth it. So here I've got that handheld belt sander. I think they call it a pipe polisher. You get it off of Amazon. Maybe I'll put a link to this tool. It's really handy for cleaning up tubing, especially this tubing that's been sitting on the shelf for like 3 years. Had some surface rust on it and pitting, so you can see it makes short work of cleaning up tube. You can get those belts in a number of different grades. You can also get belts that are what is it called? Not emery cloth, but Scotch-Brite. You can get Scotch-Brite belts too if you don't have a lot of heavy rust or mill scale to clean up. The Scotch-Brite will polish up a tube pretty quick. So, but yeah, it's pretty handy. I'm just using, I think, 120 grit on here, and then I go over it with a piece of Scotch-Brite, regular Scotch-Brite cloth, and clean up the tubing. So on these tubes, I'm doing just 2 ends. For the trailing arms, I'm doing basically the entire tube, or at least 3/4 of the tube, because of all the welding I've got to do on them. Oh, these tubes here are just 2 ends because they're just standard links or link tubes. And the wife was in there telling me how to do it, I think, or checking in about something. Cleaning up all the chips out of the inside of the tube before I go to try and weld. Okay, well, I've gone through the long and painstaking task of cleaning everything up. Now, I've got my calipers out and I'm going to measure the engagement of these weld-in bungs for the heim joints. So that's 1 and 1.31, 1.317, thereabouts. So I need to split that in half, and then what I'm doing over here is I'm going to lay out where I'm going to drill my hole for plug welds. So there'll be a weld around the perimeter of the bung, which goes right here, and then there'll be a hole that's drilled through both sides of the tube. So there'll be a hole on either side of the tube to do a plug weld, and that's going to land somewhere in the middle of this bung where it engages inside of the tube. Okay, now I'm laying out where I'm going to drill my holes for my plug welds. And this is something I learned from my buddy Jason. I know you're probably watching this, Jason. When you're building any kind of links with these rod ends and these weld-in bungs, you must always plug weld. It's cheap insurance. I know a lot of people think that just welding around the perimeter of the weld-in bung is enough, but you must always plug weld. I don't see why you wouldn't. It's just cheap insurance, and just makes things that much more strong, or that much more better. That's proper English or grammar. I'm pretty sure it's not, but anyway, I start with a 1/4 inch drill bit here, drill all the way through, and then I think I switch out to a 3/8 drill bit, drill all the way through, and then I've got a chamfer bit that I'll put in next, and I'll just chamfer everything just to give a nice seat for that weld to lay into and wet into real nice. But yeah, this building links this way is time consuming. A lot of people would probably say just get aluminum links made, but I had the material, and of course the bottom links are going to be trailing arms, so I can't really afford to pay for custom billet machined aluminum trailing arms, so I'm fabricating them. So, well, I got all the plug holes drilled, or the plug weld holes drilled. Now I'm going to go out and just knock this corner off where the weld bung slides into, just to give me a little more chamfer right there. Well, this has been a comedy of errors and struggles. I had this all positioned up. I'm using this jack stand as a steady rest for my hand to hold the torch. I'm feeding the rod in this way. I made this little roller thing for the positioner to keep the thing rolling. Apparently, I'm welding way too hot. It is way too hot, so I need to back my heat off. But the first one, I had this kind of positioned over there closer, and I started to get the porosity in my weld, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, so I stopped. Then I started going again, and then it was welding fine. And then I started getting porosity again, and what I figured out was I had the end of this tube over here. The fan for the welder was kicking on and blowing air out this way, and it was blowing my gas coverage all over the place. That's why I was getting porosity. Now, I didn't figure that out until this second one. That's why everything's repositioned this way. And then on top of that, after I get the first one welded, I coated the rod end with anti-seize, and I went to try to thread it in, and I got it all the way in. I started backing it out, and it promptly stopped and seized up. And now that sucker's stuck in the rod, or it's stuck in the heim. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get it out. I might have just ruined that whole tube. So, and that's the way I did my steering links. That's the way I did my steering links the time before. I don't recall how, in fact, I don't even know if I built the links for the first buggy, so this is kind of new or newer to me. But what I've decided I'm gonna do is I'm not gonna thread the heim joint in while the bung is hot. I'm gonna do all my welding on the bung. I'm gonna get a tap, chase the threads, and then I'll chase the threads, of course, after everything's cooled off, and then I'll thread my rod end in. But yeah, frustrated to say the least. But this is how it goes. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. Kind of screwed up, and hopefully I'll be able to salvage the other one with the rod end halfway threaded end. We'll see.
Okay, so now after all the drama, I went ahead and set up the other links in the positioner to go ahead and weld, and let's talk about what I learned from this. First off, anytime you're TIG welding, don't be in a hurry. Don't be impatient, which is very hard for me. And I learned that my heat settings were just way too hot. I keep on dialing them back, and I finally got to where I was comfortable with the way things were welding in. I still think I was a little bit too hot. I'm using 3/32 filler rod here, and it's just taking everything that I have. I'm feeding the rod in pretty quick, and I also adjusted the speed on the rotator. It's a trick in itself to get the right speed on the rotator, and I'm getting more comfortable with it. But as I got toward the end of doing everything, I was comfortable, of course, which is how it always goes. Here in this particular segment, it doesn't look like I'm feeding the rod, which I've been having trouble with. I've been trying to consciously make an effort of feeding the filler rod with my rod hand, and there I'm not actually feeding it through my fingers like I was in the earlier segment. So old habits die hard. Looks like I'm feeding it here just barely. You can see my thumb moving a little bit, but not as consistently as I was in the earlier segment of this. Anyway, just takes a lot more seat time.
Well, sweet redemption. I was stressed right out. I screwed up. I threaded this in there. Well, long story short, I was able to cut this off. Luckily enough, I cut the material longer than it needed to be, so I was still able to use this piece of tube. I just cut this off. This is seized in there. It's done. It's toast. It's hot. I tried to heat it up to get the heim out, ruin the Teflon. It's done. Sacrificial. Anyway, so I cut it off of this end of the tube, added another bung on this end, welded it up, and I'm still going to be able to use this because uniball cup and wobble stopper goes right here. And all is not lost. So I guess if it was easy, everybody would do it. I don't know. That thing just seized right up. I did the same thing I did last time when I did the steering heims, and it seemed to work out fine then, but it damn sure didn't work out fine now. I waited till this completely cooled off, and I was able to thread that in, no problem. So, but here's a preview of what's to come. This is kind of sort of what the trailing arms are going to look like. Then these will be overlaid right here. And I have a spine section that's going across the entire top of it. And of course, uniball cut down here. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's video. Everybody, thank you for watching. Please make sure you like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the algorithm. And tell your friends about it if you think they'll be interested in what I'm doing here. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you next time.